I'm fortunate. She's an amazing woman, and I have amazing kids, so it makes it, one thing feeds the other, the work and the family. It's really, I feel very lucky.
For over a decade, the world has watched Tom Cruise perform death-defying stunts and headline blockbuster films, yet very few knew the painful silence that shadowed his private life. Imagine being a young girl whose famous father's image fills every screen, but whose presence never crosses the threshold of your everyday world. What does it feel like to grow up waiting for a relationship that never comes? Now, at 19, Tom Cruise's daughter has quietly spoken her truth, not in interviews, but through a courageous choice that speaks louder than words ever could. Her story exposes a complex reality of love, absence, and the search for identity beneath the spotlight's glare. The Invisible Father. From the outside, Tom Cruise appeared to be the ultimate family man. For a time, he was seen holding his daughter's hand on the streets of New York and sharing tender moments with her. But then, almost suddenly, the presence that once seemed so constant vanished. By the time Suri was 6 years old, the echoes of footsteps she once followed in the hallway disappeared completely. The man who once lifted her into warm arms, who smiled for cameras with her at movie premieres, was gone from her daily life. To the world, this absence was puzzling. How could a father so fearless on screen retreat from the daughter he once appeared to cherish? For Suri, the experience was not one of public curiosity, but of personal emptiness. She did not cry out or demand answers. Instead, she slipped into silence, a quiet witness to a love that faded into distance. Her earliest memories of a family felt like fading photographs, beautiful but increasingly unreachable. No official story explained why Tom Cruise's footsteps stopped echoing through the house. Media speculation filled the gaps with rumors, but for Suri, it was simply life. The man whose face was splashed across billboards around her had become a stranger in her own story. Every birthday passed without a message, every holiday without a call, deepening the invisible divide between them. At school, while other children had active family lives, she learned early on what it meant to grow up without a father's consistent presence. Though no one had ever outright told her why her father vanished, the silence spoke volumes. Suri understood that some lines in her life were drawn not by chance, but by forces she could not yet name. It was a puzzle missing its center, and nobody seemed ready to help her put it together. She grew into the absence, carrying a quiet ache that never demanded to be spoken, but shaped everything around her. Behind closed doors, those who cared for her sensed the fracture, but preserved the illusions of normalcy. The world still saw a celebrity family picture, but Suri's reality was one of gaps and unspoken truths. The man who had been idolized for decades was suddenly a ghost in his own child's life, unseen and unreachable. This marked the first great loss in a story defined by separation more than connection. As Suri's world grew, the distance from her father grew along with it. The question changed from, "Where is he?" to "Why doesn't he come?" It was a shift born not of childish confusion, but of dawning understanding. When other girls boasted about weekend outings with their dads, Suri hid her disappointment behind a brave face. She began to see her father's absence as a choice rather than circumstance, and that realization deepened the wound. Publicly, Tom Cruise maintained his intense work schedule, embracing stunts and roles that kept him on the world's biggest stages. Privately, that same dedication seemed to create an unbridgeable gap between the man and the daughter who once ran toward him. No photos, no visits, and no phone calls punctuated the years since the divorce. What was once a famous name attached to a beloved child became just a headline in a story she lived alone. Despite it all, Suri never learned how to hate him. Children do not instinctively hate. What they feel is longing. She held on to hope for years, waiting for a sign, for one moment to prove she mattered more than the silence. As the years stretched on, that hope quietly faded, replaced by the difficult decision to accept the life given to her. Yet, even in acceptance, the missing pieces of her father's love left a permanent mark. This absence was the heart of a much larger story, one tangled in secrecy and shaped by powerful forces. What caused this distance went beyond ordinary family breakdowns and Hollywood headlines. Answers lay hidden in layers of protection, control, and fears that would slowly come to light as Suri found her own voice. The truth she finally claimed was heavier than most imagined, but it provided the foundation for the life she would choose to build. The shadows around Suri's early years, were not just created by absence, but by forces lurking just beyond the public gaze. A childhood in the shadows. Suri's earliest memories were painted in luxury. Private estates, red carpet events, and glossy magazine covers showed a perfect existence. To outsiders, her life looked charmed and unbreakable. But behind the scenes, the picture was far more complicated. The family operated under the strict codes of Scientology, an organization with rules that shaped every aspect of their lives. Her birth itself was marked by silence, a ritual imposed by the church's teachings that required her mother, Katie Holmes, to suppress even sounds of pain. Black-suited men watched carefully, enforcing rituals that neither Katie nor Suri had chosen. Tom Cruise described these actions as devotion, but Katie called it survival. From her very first moments, Suri's life was defined by invisible pressures and restrictions she wouldn't understand for many years. As Suri grew, so did the surveillance surrounding her mother. Friends took notice of the constant presence of Scientology associates moving like shadows, monitoring Katie's every move. She was rarely seen alone, and whispers of control and fear drifted quietly through social circles. For Suri, though, this was just the background noise of childhood. Footsteps in the hall, movie nights, and warm arms that sometimes held her. However, the cracks beneath the surface were widening fast. Katie's parents expressed growing alarm at the influence the church seemed to have over their daughter and granddaughter. The private world they inhabited was filled with invisible boundaries and unspoken rules. The family's seemingly glamorous life felt increasingly like a carefully guarded secret. By the time Suri was 6, the tension in the household had reached a breaking point. The father she once knew faded away, and the quiet in the house grew louder. The man who had carried her through the early years was suddenly absent. What seemed like a sudden disappearance was actually the result of slow, deliberate shifts, shaped by circumstances far beyond a typical family's struggles. Katie Holmes grew more cautious, changing phones, replacing staff, and avoiding monitored spaces in the home. Each act was a step in a silent war to protect her daughter from something dangerous and controlling. The world only glimpsed the polished smiles on magazine covers, but behind them was a mother consumed by fear and determination. Despite the shadows that surrounded them, Katie attempted to create a haven for Suri. She walked her to school, cooked simple dinners, and shielded her from the constant public attention. But no amount of protection could mask the silence left by a missing father, or the uncertainty that filled the spaces between. In this environment, Suri absorbed lessons she never asked to learn. She witnessed the strain in her family, the quiet desperation in her mother's actions, and the weight of a life governed by invisible rules. Her childhood was a careful balance between public fascination and private fear, a struggle to find normalcy in an extraordinary situation. Little did Suri know, the choices made during these years would shape her future in ways she could never have imagined. The shadows that surrounded her childhood were not simply about absence, but about control, sacrifice, and the fight for freedom that had yet to be won. The protective efforts at home were just the beginning of a longer, harder journey for both mother and daughter. Katie Holmes's silent struggle. Katie Holmes's decision to separate from Tom Cruise was one of Hollywood's fastest and most shocking splits, but it was far from sudden to those who understood the hidden battle behind closed doors. Preparing to leave meant more than signing papers. It meant planning an escape from a system that threatened her family's freedom. Her choice was fueled by fear as much as it was by love. Behind her carefully managed public image, Katie lived in constant anxiety. She switched phones often, fearing surveillance and leaks. She avoided certain hallways in their home and replaced staff suspected of reporting back to Scientology. Every night, she held Suri closer, terrified that even one misstep could jeopardize custody. This was a war fought in silence, invisible to the world, but all-consuming for her. Setting New York as their new home was strategic. Katie knew the law favored a parent determined to provide stability for a child, especially in custody battles influenced by external pressures. Filing for divorce while Tom Cruise was filming in Iceland allowed her to move quickly and quietly, avoiding confrontation. The news blindsided the public and Tom himself, who learned through headlines rather than personal contact. At the heart of Katie's fight was a singular priority: to raise Suri outside the grasp of Scientology's strictest programs. Court documents revealed that Katie feared her daughter being drawn into the Sea Org, a notoriously demanding branch of the church that many former members described as a harsh environment no child should face. Her battle was about protecting the future of her daughter, no matter the personal cost. The divorce was finalized swiftly, only 11 days after filing. Tom agreed to substantial financial support and relinquished custody. But money was never Katie's goal. For her, freedom was everything. Without custody, she feared the church's influence would remain unchallenged. As soon as the legal battle ended, she and Suri left Los Angeles like ghosts, armed with little more than hope and a handful of belongings. In New York, Katie worked tirelessly to shield Suri from media attention and from the echoes of their old life. Her protective instincts shaped their daily routines, walking her to school, simple dinners, quiet evenings. Yet even with such care, the scars of the past lingered in the silence that surrounded them. Katie refused to speak ill of Tom publicly. She understood the delicate balance between truth and protection, choosing to preserve her daughter's innocence for as long as possible. She believed some truths were too heavy for a child until the right time. This silent struggle was about survival, love, and hope for a life less burdened by fear and control. Katie was determined to break the cycle, even if it meant facing enormous challenges alone. Through this ordeal, Katie planted the seeds for Suri's eventual awakening and reclamation of her own story, one not bound by shadows but defined by resilience. The journey from protection to freedom would be neither simple nor swift, but it paved the way for the truth Suri would one day dare to tell. The Scientology divide. Scientology's influence was more than background noise in Suri's life. It was a powerful force that shaped the very lines of separation within her family. The church's strict rules dictated not only the public behaviors of Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, but also controlled private decisions. Former members have described it as a system that discourages connections outside its circle, sometimes severing ties with anyone who steps away. For Katie, this meant she was living under constant surveillance and pressure, trying to shield Suri from an organization she deeply feared. Custody became the battlefield where these tensions played out most painfully. Katie's fight was more than a legal battle. It was a war to protect her daughter from being drawn into Scientology's most demanding programs. Among the greatest fears was Suri being pushed into the Sea Org, a branch known for its strict discipline and heavy control, where children can face harsh restrictions. Katie stood resolute, sacrificing her career, friendships, and privacy to gain full custody and safeguard Suri's freedom. The legal documents revealed the depth of this concern. While money was part of the settlement, the most important right Katie fought for was the ability to raise her daughter outside the church's influence. This was a rare and significant victory given Tom Cruise's long-standing devotion to Scientology. For Katie, custody was the key to keeping Suri's life unshackled by the pressures she herself had endured. Tom Cruise had been unaware of the divorce filing until it was public. The move was strategic, done while he was filming abroad to avoid confrontation and make the transition as smooth as possible for Suri. It marked a turning point that no one saw coming, bringing the family's private battles out into the open through headlines alone. These headlines barely scratched the surface of the complex forces at play behind the scenes. In the months and years that followed, whispers about Scientology's role and involvement continued to grow. Friends and insiders noted how the church's influence cast a long shadow over every decision Katie made. The fear of monitoring and retaliation kept her guarded and determined, as if in a silent war fought not with words but with careful steps and strategic moves. This context framed Suri's childhood as much more than a simple story of a missing father. It revealed a system pressing down from all sides, creating boundaries that even love struggled to cross. The lines drawn were not just between two people, but between ideologies, loyalties, and the very possibility of freedom. From this perspective, her father's absence took on a new and far weightier meaning. Despite these challenges, Katie did everything she could to protect her daughter's normalcy. She built a life in New York designed to shelter Suri from the church's reach and the public's gaze alike. Quiet routines replaced red carpets, and small moments replaced public appearances. Still, the undercurrent of control and fear was never fully escaped. Scientology's role created both visible and invisible walls around Suri's life. It set strict conditions on contact, dictated movements, and influenced custody terms in ways that few outside the circle truly understood. This isolation shaped her experience of family, forcing her to grow up with boundaries that couldn't easily be crossed by either parent. Understanding this divide is essential to grasp why Suri's relationship with her father was so fragile and distant. It was not simply absence, but a complicated silence imposed by a larger force, one that would shape her search for identity and truth in the years to come. No matter how loud the world's spotlight shone on Tom Cruise's daring feats, the boundaries set by this divide never wavered. And for Suri, they became an unspoken truth she had to live with every day. Love alone was not enough to bridge the gap created by conviction and control. Growing up without a father. Suri's reality was shaped by a father who existed everywhere yet remained nowhere in her daily life. While his face adorned movie posters and her world buzzed with news of his stunts and blockbusters, the personal connection she craved was painfully absent. Other children grew up with bedtime stories and school events shared with their dads, but for Suri, these moments were fleeting memories from a time before everything changed. After moving to New York, Katie dedicated herself to creating a stable, quiet life for her daughter, acting as shield and guide against the relentless media attention and public fascination. School routines, simple dinners, and homework took the place of celebrity glamour. Yet, there was one thing Katie could not protect her from: the silence left by a father who no longer showed up. With every passing birthday without a call, every milestone marked in quiet solitude, the weight of absence grew heavier in Suri's heart. She tried to rationalize his non-appearance, imagining the demands of his career explained the distance. But as years passed, she came to understand the painful truth: some absences are choices. At 10 years old, her innocent questions turned sharper, first wondering where her dad was, then why he didn't come. Watching her friends being picked up after school or rehearsals deepened the sting she masked well. Learning emotional independence was not something she chose, but a survival skill. She learned to carry her disappointments silently, so her mother would not have to worry. Even as media speculation swirled about Tom Cruise's involvement, confirmed sightings or visits were virtually non-existent. Reports said he saw Suri only once after the divorce, and no photographs or phone calls surfaced afterward. To the world, this was a Hollywood mystery. To Suri, it was simply her life, an ongoing lesson in absence and longing. Despite the gap, Suri did not grow up with hatred. Children understand loss, but rarely hate. Instead, she grew up aching, carrying the hope that someday her father might reach across the distance. That hope gradually faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of a reality that offered no explanation and few answers. Her childhood was punctuated by solitude: the subway rides she took alone, the school projects she completed without help, and the emotional milestones she met quietly. Through it all, Katie remained her steadfast protector, her constant presence in a life marked by loss. They shared a bond forged not only in love, but in shared sorrow and resilience. Suri's story is one of survival, not victimhood. Growing up without her father present was a harsh reality, but it also revealed her strength. It was a life shaped by what was missing, but defined ultimately by what she chose to carry forward. Suri's path was not easy, but within that hardship was the quiet seed of freedom waiting to bloom. The moment of awakening. By the time Suri reached her early teens, she had lived many years shaped by silence and unanswered questions. Fragments of whispered conversations about Scientology, custody battles, and control had floated around her in ways adults thought she wouldn't understand. For years, these fragments were just background noise, mysterious and confusing. But everything changed in 2020, when the world shut down and she finally had quiet time to reflect on a life few had explained. During those still months, Suri began to seek out answers on her own terms. She read documentaries, interviews, and testimonies from former Scientology members, searching for pieces that might shed light on what had shaped her childhood and fractured her family. While the full story remained just out of reach, she saw herself reflected between the lines, a collateral figure caught in a system she never chose to be part of. This recognition transformed her understanding of the silences and absences that had defined her life. The more she learned, the more she understood why her father's presence had been so limited. Former insiders described how relationships could be severed if someone refused involvement or stepped outside the organization's rules. Suri was just a child, but she realized what outside meant: distance, separation, and barriers that even love couldn't bridge. It was a painful realization that her father's absence wasn't just about a busy career or ordinary family issues, but about boundaries set by something larger and more controlling. The realization that she experienced changed her inside, but it was not in the form of anger or hatred. It was a mixture of deep mourning and understanding. She had not been brought up to dislike Tom Cruise. On the contrary, she had waited for a long time. She waited for birthday greetings, meetings, and any other sign that he preferred her to the pulling forces between them. It was a long-standing truth that for a dozen years she had been the one standing at the door, listening for the footsteps which she would never hear. Suri was 15 when one of the most touching moments occurred without a word. She saw her mom sitting silently on the floor with tears in her eyes as she read about the premiere of Tom's new movie. They didn't need to talk. The silence that was in the air around them was so heavy it could be felt like the weight of the sharing of their experiences. Katie had been alone in her suffering of being abandoned for years. She was covering her daughter with the mantle of her own non-bitter and resilient life. Katie had always been very careful and considerate in her remarks about Tom. She knew that there were some truths which are very painful and could be given to a child only when she was ready to receive them. It was this very belief that granted Suri the license to keep her innocence much longer than others might have thought. But at the age of 16, she was ready, not for the public's version of events, but for her own truth. The process of claiming her voice set the stage for an act of courage few could have predicted: claiming her own identity. Turning 18 in April 2024 marked a profound milestone for Suri, more than just a birthday. It was the moment she gained legal independence and the ability to control her own narrative. Suddenly, she was no longer bound to the shadows of her father's name or the public scrutiny that came with it. This newfound freedom sparked a quiet but powerful transformation. In the weeks leading up to her birthday, Suri poured years of silence and unspoken feelings into her college application essays. Her words resonated deeply, particularly the line, "Sometimes we don't grow up with love. We grow up with the space that love leaves behind." It was the first time she put into words what she had felt since early childhood, a frank, aching truth that needed no further explanation. The world knew who she meant without her ever mentioning a name. While many teenagers celebrated with parties, Suri spent her 18th birthday confronting herself in the mirror, a young woman shaped by loss and perseverance. She realized that waiting for a call, a hug, or an explanation that would never come was no longer serving her. This realization led her to a quiet but momentous decision. She would no longer carry the weight of being Tom Cruise's daughter. On May 17, 2024, Suri took the decisive step of legally changing her name to Suri Noel Holmes, adopting her mother's middle name in tribute to the woman who had been her steadfast protector. Contrary to expectations that this moment would be marked by tears, Suri felt relief, the kind that follows after letting go of a painful burden that only caused harm. The name change instantly made headlines. It appeared in her high school graduation program and on the cast list for her role in the Addams Family musical. Later, it showed up on her acceptance letter from Carnegie Mellon University, where she began a fashion major. Many called it an act of rebellion, but for Suri, it was an act of freedom, a declaration that her identity belonged to her, not to her father's legacy. By the time she started college in the fall of 2024, Suri had completed a marked transformation. She was no longer the child whose every step was monitored and photographed, no longer just Tom Cruise's daughter, but a young woman forging her own path. She embraced ordinary life, subway rides, school projects, performances, apart from the glare of fame. Her mother remained a constant ally, helping her settle into dorm life and carrying the memories of battles fought in silence. Katie's pride in her daughter's resilience was quiet but immense. She had raised a girl who survived fame, abandonment, and overwhelming silence, and emerged grounded, kind, and driven. Tom Cruise's life continued to be defined by extremes, high-profile films, daring stunts, and new ventures. Yet, despite the world's applause, he never made the steps toward rebuilding his relationship with Suri. Insiders say he fulfills financial obligations but has made no visible efforts to close the distance. This moment of claiming herself was a quiet revolution, one born of survival and shaped by the courage to finally say, "This is who I am." Life beyond the name. Suri Noel Holmes stepped into adulthood carrying neither the weight of a famous last name nor the silence that once defined her childhood. By the fall of 2024, as she began her freshman year at Carnegie Mellon University, majoring in fashion, she embraced a fresh identity, a young woman untethered from the legacy of Tom Cruise's stardom. Riding subways in New York and Pittsburgh, she experienced ordinary moments most teenagers take for granted, a sharp contrast to the highly controlled life she'd once known. This new chapter wasn't just about her name change, it was about freedom. After surviving years of absence and secrecy, Suri now carved a path shaped by her own choices, dreams, and ambitions. Away from flashing cameras and paparazzi scrutiny, she could simply be a student among thousands, building a future centered on passion rather than fame. Katie Holmes remained a steadfast presence, supporting her daughter through these transitions. From helping move her into her dorm to bearing witness to her growth, Katie's role was that of protector and cheerleader. The mother, who had once fought silent battles, now watched proudly as her daughter blossomed into a grounded and driven young adult. Although the world widely considered Suri to be a representation of Hollywood's broken relationships or Tom Cruise's absentee fatherhood, she nevertheless proved to be a very strong person. A child who, after all the hurt and public speculation, came out as nice and assured. The resistance was not by chance, but it was strong and loving support from her mother that finally made her come out better. On the other hand, Tom Cruise was still living a life characterized by high risk and enormous fortunes. His acting career went through a series of blockbusters and even a space that would be the setting for his future movie. At the same time, his career had taken him very far, but the one relationship that he had with his daughter, who was once running to him, was the one that he never dared to recreate. People in the know say that Tom is still legally responsible for the financial aspects of the custody agreement, which includes schooling and medical expenses, but there have been no known phone calls, visits, or attempts to get around the emotional gap that have occurred. For more than 10 years, Suri has been disconnected from her father, and the relationship has been characterized by silence rather than reconciliation. Suri, now 19 years old, has learned to live with this distance. She does not wait for messages on birthdays or sit by the door for a father who does not come anymore. She is instead building her own life, one that is based on her being independent and loving herself. The little girl who only cried in her own corner is now walking with confidence, and the name that she picked for herself, and the truth that she has. Thank you for joining this story of courage, loss, and transformation. If Suri's journey moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories that go beyond the headlines. Your support helps these voices be heard.